Evening all. So what is the global rackspace and how can we incorporate that into our live rig inside Gig Performer? Well, in terms of connecting up and controlling VSTs, it works in a very similar way to your standard local rackspaces. The global rackspace has its own wiring view, as you can see here, and its own panels view. To access the global rackspace, you toggle this button on and off here. If you toggle it on, you then have access to its wiring view and its panels view, and you can connect up and control things just like you would with a local rackspace. However, there's one key difference with the global rackspace. It's always on and it's always active. Now, in this wiring view, you can see there's a lot going on, but fear not. I'm going to break it down step by step, and this shows you 4 of the probably most common ways that you might use the global rackspace. So number 1, you can set up a permanent instrument or effects patch in the global rackspace, which will then run completely independently of your other local rackspaces. So what does that mean? Well, say you're a keyboard player, for instance, and you've got more than one keyboard, you've got 2 or 3 on the go, and you want one particular keyboard to always have one sound available. That could be like a piano or an organ or whatever. So no matter what else is going on inside Gig Performer, you can come back to that keyboard and that's always going to be the sound that you've set up, completely unaffected by anything else. I've set up a little piano patch here that is being controlled by my Casio keyboard. Here's a little video showing you how that works. Here's the piano being controlled by the Casio. And that's in the global rackspace, remember. Now, all the other local rackspaces are being controlled at the moment by my Korg. And you can hear one of the synth string patches I've set up. I've created a little bit of cut-off control with this knob. But here's that lovely seamless switching feature of Gig Performer. So I'm going to hold the sustain pedal while this synth string pad is droning away. Lovely. Now let it go and it's going to be droning away nicely. I can continue to play on the piano. Just a lovely, lovely sound. Now I've also set up the Korg to change my local rackspaces by using the top 2 keys of the keyboard. When I hit the top C here, you'll see that the rackspace is going to switch sounds, like so. However, that synth string pad is still droning away, still playing the piano. And while the synth string is still droning away, I can play that lead over the top. Lovely. And that drone will only go away when I release the sustain pedal. Now, it doesn't have to be an instrument patch, it could be an effects patch. So say you're a vocalist and you play an instrument too, you can set up your vocal effects chain inside the global rackspace, and that will then run completely unaffected by anything else you're doing. Check out the pipes on this Goober. And I'm making things as awkward as possible for myself because I've just remembered that I've set up the reverb switch for the vocals all the way over here. Bottle of whites, bottle of red, perhaps a bottle of rosé instead. This is also really useful for you guitarists. So if you're using more than one guitar in your setup,
don't touch it. Don't touch it.
I wasn't going to touch it.
No, don't touch it.
and you want one particular guitar to always have a particular effects chain set up with it, set it up inside the global rackspace, and then all you have to do is plug it in, strap it on, and do your thing. Now, number 2, you can pre-process audio and MIDI and then send that out to your local rackspaces for further processing. So for instance, now, if you've seen the other few videos, you'll know that I can't play guitar. However, I do play guitar VSTs. So I can demonstrate how you can pre-process audio signals coming in via the global rackspace and then send that out to your other rackspaces for further sound processing. So let's break this down step by step. Here's my guitar VST here. Now, if you're a guitarist, you can pretend that's your guitar signal coming in. We're then going to pre-process all the audio coming from that guitar inside whatever VST that you want. In this particular instance here, I've got a lovely tube channel strip type of situation going on. So it gives me some tube preamp, a little bit of EQ. I've got a bit of compression going on and overall volume. So that's there all the time. Now the audio is coming out of that VST and into this little block here that's called 2 rackspaces. This is one of 2 special blocks that we can use inside the global rackspace and our local rackspaces to run audio and MIDI between the 2 of them. Very, very, very clever and very, very useful. So how does it work? Let's double click on the 2 rackspaces first. Here we can actually alter how many audio channels we have. So you can have a whopping 64 channels going into this if you want to. I'm going to keep it simple and keep it to 4. We also have a MIDI input here, which will then send MIDI information to whichever local rackspace is activated at that time. Are you following me so far? Right, so let's head now to a local rackspace. Here's one called Guitar Blues. And you can see here, it's wired up a little bit differently to what we've been using so far in the series. We're not bringing in audio via our interface. We are using another couple of special blocks that we can use in our local rackspaces to route audio to and from the global rackspace. To access these, we right click and choose global processing. And we can add a from global rackspace block and a to global rackspace block. So let's have a quick look at the from rackspace block. Now, as you can see, it's a little bit upside down from the one we've just seen. There's no inputs coming in here, just outputs. That's because it's getting all of its audio and MIDI signals from that 2 rackspaces block. Now, how it does it, I have no idea. I like to think of it going through some
interdimensional wormhole thing and then popping back out to your local rackspace.
The audio from that block, this block here, 2 rackspaces, is coming in to this block here from global rackspace. Now, when I play, you're hearing that guitar coming through that VST there and then out to a local rackspace just there. We're then processing that audio through whatever kind of VST situation that you want to do. I'm using THU here. And then we come to this to global rackspace, which works in the opposite way to the from global rackspace. This is going to send any audio or MIDI information from your local rackspace back to the global rackspace. So it looks a little strange in your local rackspaces because we've got nothing connected up to your audio interface like we would normally do with a local rackspace, and there's nothing coming out to your audio outputs to your interface. It's all just self-contained here. It's all coming in and out from your global rackspace. The beauty in this, however, is that it automatically switches the signals to whichever local rackspace is getting used. So that preamp situation here, that tube strip there, I'm going to try and keep that on screen. Let's head back to the panels view. This is your local rackspaces here. That tube channel strip is always having the signal from that guitar, but we can now route that to any local rackspace. So why is this useful? Well, say you've got 20 different types of guitar tones going on in your local rackspaces. Well, you could, in theory, if you wanted to, just set up this tube strip in every single rackspace. However, it's much more efficient to use the global rackspace and use just one instance of that and then run your audio out to your other local rackspaces. Now, very useful for, like I say, vocal reverbs, general purpose EQs, limiters, compressors, all these types of things that are going to be generically used all the time in your rackspaces. Use the global rackspace and then route that signal out to your local rackspaces. Now, the third way is probably the opposite to the second way. You can post-process audio and MIDI on the way out to your speakers. So like to that guitar sound, you can actually see by the activated wiring there that the signal is going out to the Rackspaces and then coming back in to this little block here from Rackspaces. So if you set up any local Rackspace and use this to Global Rackspace block, that will send audio and MIDI back to that little block there from Rackspaces. And here we have some post-processing going on. So instead of setting up an EQ and a limiter, for instance, in every single Rackspace, you can just set them up once and route your audio through them at the end and then out to your speakers. Now, all these things are really, really useful if you're making really complicated rigs, or if you've got a computer that's a little bit on the dated side and kind of struggling. If you're going to do multiple instances of all those VSTs, things start to get a little bit kind of chunky. So yeah, use the Global Rackspace to keep things more efficient. Now, the fourth way, and extremely useful way of using the Global Rackspace, is via the System Actions block. You might have come across this in your travels. You can load up the System Actions box by right-clicking and choosing System and System Actions. Now, this can be a strange looking little box. It has no audio inputs and it has a little lonely MIDI output block. It doesn't seem like you can do much with it. However, if you put that in your global Rackspace or a local Rackspace if you want to, you get access to a lot of extra functions inside GigFormer. So I'm going to show you some of the ways you can use System Actions inside the global Rackspace to really make life easy for you. So let's head to the global Rackspace panels view, where I've already set up some things you can do with the System Actions block. Now, like I said before, with the global Rackspace, it has its own panels view. So if you click Edit, you can set things up inside here exactly the same way as you would with a local Rackspaces. Knobs and buttons and switches and lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Now, I almost forgot. Because the global Rackspace is always on and always active, you can have it showing on screen, always on and always active, independently of your local Rackspaces. So let's head back to the standard panels view. This is all my local Rackspaces here. If we head down to the bottom of the screen here, to the bottom right, and click that little arrow button up, this gives you your global Rackspace panels view, and this will always be on regardless of what other Rackspaces are activated in your local Rackspaces. Very, very handy. So let's head back to the wiring view of the global Rackspace, and you can see I've put in that System Actions block. Once you do that, you can then map controls and widgets and things to various global parameters inside GigFormer. So down at the bottom here in the mapping section, you can see I've got my System Actions block chosen, and you can see all the different things that you can map to a widget and a control. You can see here I've used a transpose up and down. You have metronome, you can tap tempo, you can turn on and off Ableton Link, all sorts of really useful things you can use. The tuner, very, very useful for you guitarists. Panic button, which is also good for us MIDI guys. I'm not going to show you everything here, but there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So here I've set up a few things. I've got the tuner mapped to a button. There we go, very useful. Now I've also set up some global transpose buttons. And because this is global, this will work on all of your Rackspaces. Very handy. And there's also a panic button. Just in case you get a stuck note now and then, you can hit the panic button. You can hear that shuts everything off. So that kind of wraps up this video. I hope that kind of shows you the most common ways that you're going to probably use the global Rackspace, but I'm sure you'll find other ways of using it. It depends on your situation. So anyway, yep, I will see you in the next one.